Hello guys, I'm back from another video and series about what if Deku was the only boy with a quote-unquote quirk. So, in the last video we talked about after a while of basically resting, they would be told by MASH it's finally time for them to get ready to go to the USJ to basically kill their target. In this case, the leader of the League of Villains by the name of Shigaraki. So, they would start to go on to their, positions. Specifically, some of the group would basically go on to, Rider's ship, otherwise known as Santa Maria. And as for, Izuku, he would start to ride on his newly acquired jet plane. So, after they started moving on to go to, to the USJ, they would basically arrive there. As for Izuku, instead of landing the plane safely, he would basically destroy the plane and crash it into the USJ proper. Yeah, let's just say Ryder was not really happy about that, especially because of the way he had to get it. So yeah, as the rest of the members would basically go down all the way to the, ground of the USJ, they would start fighting both of the USJ, participants. In this case, the League of Villains and the heroes, or the heroes in training technically. So, after a while of fighting and also murdering some of the League of Villain members, and also Izuku basically fighting off the, Nomu, the pro heroes would basically arrive as, well, All Might would start fighting, Izuku, including Bakugo and also Izumi. But when Bakugo would basically get the upper hand, well, All Might would basically come in and basically break his mask. After Izuku got his mask broken, everybody would see that it's, Izuku. As when, Bakugo sees that it's Izuku would basically start becoming even more rage-fueled. And because of this, well, a certain girl, aka, MASH, would basically have to bring out her big guns. In this case, a special flute, which would activate a noble phantasm. In this case, called Pied Piper Ballet, which, when she used it, it would basically, control Izuku once again, similar to the, mask, or the helmet. But when she does use it, it would cause Izuku to basically gain, two of them. Like, he would have, two of these large, Kukulkan altar gauntlets, and gains a new mask or helmet, which more resembles an animal, in this case a large wolf/dog. So, he would start fighting everybody as All Might would basically tell both Bakugo and, well, Izumi to basically take care of her, because apparently that is the actual thing that's basically controlling Izuku. After she basically, destroyed the, flute, aka, Bakugo would basically destroy the flute, Izuku would basically go into a feeding frenzy. Not really that, more like he's going insane as he would start clawing at his hair and also his face. As after a while of basically doing that, he would basically fall down and basically is knocked out. As for, well, a little side thing, apparently both not Mount Lady, I meant Midnight and also Assassin would basically start fighting, but Assassin would be defeated by Midnight, as she would basically ask for some information about this group that, well, Izuku and him is basically, working for. But when, wait for a second. But when MASH hears about it, she would basically use one of her command seals to basically tell, Assassin to go kill himself. So, after he basically committed seppuku, well, let's just say Midnight was horrified seeing this. So, she would basically say this to every single one of her, heroic spirits or pseudo-servants, except for Izuku and Assassin for obvious reasons. And by the way, it's MASH Kirillite. She would basically say this: it's time for them to finally leave, because it's time for them to get some rest now. They already did their job. Kind of. So, because of this, they would start to leave, except for Izuku, because MASH would basically tell all of them that it's better to just leave him off there. So, after she basically leaves with the rest of them, well, they would basically start to bring Izuku towards UA. And the one that was carrying him was Miss Ida. So, after bringing him to the, to the to the UA infirmary, they would basically start watching him because they want to check on him and also get some information about this group that basically attacked them. And for All Might, she was, well, let's just say awkward and a bit guilty, because after knowing that her successor, aka Zumi, was her brother. Well, let's just say she's a bit guilty for basically saying that he couldn't become a hero because he was a boy. And after seeing him turn into this, she wants to make it up to him, but unfortunately he's still knocked out. So this is going to be the end of this explanation about what happened last episode. So yeah, so I will start the actual, story right now. So let's talk about what happens next. So let's move to a different perspective. So we move to All Might and the rest of the students, which apparently they're gonna be having dorms today. So all of the students, mostly 1A, 1B, and etc., would be going into the dorms, as All Might is basically watching all of them, as she would see her, successor. In this case, wait for a second. Her successor, aka Izumi Midoriya, aka Izuku's, older sister, quote unquote, because technically they're, twins, but technically she was the first one to be, that basically came out of the womb. So yeah, technically she's the older sibling. So yeah, so she would basically say this to All Might. So All Might, do you know what happened to my brother? She would say this. Oh, yeah, he's currently in the infirmary right now. As when Bako hears this, she would basically start running towards the infirmary to basically see Izuku, as she would basically start, pushing people away, as one person would basically notice this. Specifically, a girl with pink hair and pink skin, with two large horns and, dark eyes, with, golden irises, as she would start to follow Bakugo. When she sees that Bakugo's going to the infirmary, as she would say this. I wonder where she's going. Wait, why is she going into the infirmary? She would basically follow her, as she would see that she's basically looking at the same boy from the USJ. As she would say, wait, that's the guy with the quirk. The boy with the quirk. What is he doing here? She would basically start to shake a little, as she would notice that Bakugo is basically crying, as she would never see Bakugo cry like this before. She would mostly see Bakugo boasting that she's going to become the number one hero, or basically start, bullying somebody, or maybe even, or even getting into a fight. So, seeing Bakugo in this state, she was curious. So she would start to, sneak a little, going closer to them, as she would basically hide under a nearby, I guess you can say wait for a second, a nearby, hospital bed, as she would start to hear their conversation. Actually, it's more like a one-way conversation, because, Izuku is currently, still pretty much asleep. Not really asleep, more like in a coma, as she would start to cry, saying, Izuku, please be okay, please. She would basically start to cry, as when she hears this, she would say, so, does Bakugo have feelings for him? As she would start to, smirk a little, as she would say, oh, she's in love with him. She would start to, give off this more smug smile, as Bakugo would say this, Izuku, just come back to me. Please just wake up. She would basically start to cry, as they would hear the sound of the door opening, as they would see a girl, in this case, Recovery Girl, as Recovery Girl would say this. So, are you two, or at least you, Miss Bakugo, why are you here exactly? As you would see that she's basically crying while looking at, Izuku, as she would say this. Are you perhaps childhood friends or something? Or do you know him in a personal level? as she would say this. Yes, I do know him. She would basically start to cry a little bit, as she would say, it's all my fault. It's all my fault. She would basically start to cry a lot, as tears would start spewing out of her eyes, almost like a freaking waterfall, basically. As she would say this, "What happened, dear? Are you perhaps as she would say this, well, it's just a long story, but long story short, it's my fault that he committed suicide." When she hears this, and also, this girl basically hears this as well, she would basically start to explain, including the part where she basically told Izuku to basically jump off the roof just because he's a boy. As when she hears this, she would say, "Wait, Miss, I know it's your fault, but still, it's not technically your fault. I mean, that girl was the reason that," as she would say this, being Bako, "but it's still my fault that he became this." As she would basically jump a little, as Bako would basically still be in tears, as she would say, "It's my fault that Izuku became this. I just want my Izuku back." She would basically start to cry even more, as she would say this, specifically, wait for a second, specifically Recovery Girl, as she would say this, "Bakugo, just, it's not your fault. The girl was the one that basically turned him into this, or whatever he turned into." As she would say this, "You're right, but still, if I didn't told him to basically jump off the roof, he could have," she would basically start to cry even more, as she would basically start to comfort, Bakugo, as she would say this, "Shh, shh, don't worry, kid. And besides, it's not your fault, dear, okay? I mean, it's just, I know some people can do horrible things, but people can change. And maybe even Izuku might, accept you. Maybe even, you know," as she would basically start to cry even more. As she would basically start crying a lot. As this girl, basically, the pink haired one, and also technically the pink haired and also, um, pink face girl, or, pink skin girl, you'll basically get it. She would basically start crawling to go outside, aka, get out of the, infirmary, as she would start to run away, going back to the dorms. As she would say, "Ooh hoo hoo, I think I found some good juicy ass, information." She would basically start moving on to basically go back to the dorms. So, she, aka, Bakugo, would basically start to stay with Izuku, wanting to stay with him for maybe a few more hours. She would basically hold on Izuku's hand, seeing that his gauntlet, or the large, bone, claw, is basically gone. As she would say this, "Izuku, what happened to you? What did that girl do to you?" She would basically say that under her breath, as she would feel that somebody's watching them. And it's not, Recovery Girl, as she would say this, "Why do I feel somebody's watching us?" As she would say this, specifically Bakugo, "I don't know, but it definitely feels weird." As she would, as both of them would basically start to look around, as they would see a figure. This figure seems to resemble kind of like Izuku, but a bit more younger, and seems to be wearing similar clothing to this, like specifically the, suit part, but without the, feather collar thing, as he seems to be wielding several knives, as he would say this. "Why, hello there, ladies." As both of them would basically, jump a little, as they would see right beside him is a large, dark-skinned man wearing similar, attire to, to like a Celtic warrior, kind of. And he also seems to have several different, accents of this, bone-like, um, I guess construct or whatever. Actually, wait for a second. This almost bone-like substance all over his body, as you would say this. So, you must be the one that killed our... Not really killed, more like caused our little host to turn into this. I mean, you're technically one of the causes of it, but you're not indirectly the one that basically turned him into this mindless berserker. As right beside that, large, almost dark-skinned man was a man clad in pure black armor with the same, similar visor to the, a same similar visor to his, used to be helmet. As he seems to be, chained up. Like he's completely bound in chains, more specifically, golden chains. As he seems to be snarling in anger, almost like he's completely mad. He's wearing full-plated armor, resembling a medieval knight. As he would start screaming out, Arthur! As he would basically start screaming out, as several people would basically come into the, infirmary, specifically some of the teachers. Like, for example, All Might Aizawa and Midnight. As they would see the three figures, as All Might would say this, Who are you? As he would say this, specifically, the man with a similar suit to, I guess you could say torso, and also technically like, bottom, I guess you could say pants, of Izuku, as he would say this. Oh, I've forgotten my manners. Allow me to introduce myself. I am one of the heroic spirits that I'm fused with your little visitor, I guess you can say, otherwise known as Izuku Midoriya. As she would say this, specifically, Bako, as she would say, fused? What is that supposed to mean? As he would say this, mind your temper, little girl. I mean, a lady like you should not have, that type of attitude with me. And besides, why don't you try and wear a dress sometimes? As she would basically start to blush a little bit, as she would basically scream at him, getting ready to, use her explosions, as he would basically dodge the attack. As he would say this, damn feisty. As he, or, she would say this, why, you little brat. She would start to create more explosions, as he would say this, hold on. Besides, I don't really want to fight you. Besides, it's quite beneficial for you and our host here. As one of them would specifically say this, specifically Aizawa. Your host? What is that supposed to mean? As he would say this, well, we are heroic spirits, the physical manifestations of heroic figures from mythology, historical, and also literary type places. Like, for example, allow me to introduce you my real name, my true name. The name's Jacques the Ripper, the most famous serial killer in all of London. As everybody would be in shock, as All Might would just say this, Jack the Ripper, as he would say this, oh yeah, the woman killer, the man who was said to be the most terrifying serial killer in all of London, the man who ripped all of those damn prostitutes and turned them into nothing more than art. As he would basically give off this more sadistic smile, as the man with the dark skin and almost, tribal tattoos all over his body would say this, the name's Cucullin Ulta. So, I'm guessing you're the ones that basically saved our master from that Mash Kyrielite. Tuh! That damn girl who turned us into this monster. He would basically say that. As one of them would say this, Cucullin, she would say, specifically, specifically Aizawa, as she would say this, you sound familiar. As he would say this, well, I was formerly the Shout of Light, but unfortunately I was cursed to become this. As she would say this, wait, as in that Shout of Light, as in... Yes, he would say this, yes, the greatest hero of all Ireland, now reduced to a damn beast. And now a freaking berserker instead of a lancer, just like you, Jack. As he would say this, well, it makes sense for me to become a berserker. After all, two of my legends are pretty much prominent, and make me into a berserker for that reason. And one of them would say this, specifically All Might. So, what about the man in the armor and several chains around him? As he would say this, specifically Cuchulainn, as he would say this. Well, that's the downfall of King Arthur. Meet Lancelot of the Lake, or Lancelot du Lac. As he would start to glare, specifically, Lancelot, as he would say this, Arthur! As he would start to glare at All Might. Because, remember, All Might has, blue eyes and also, blondish hair. Even though she's pretty much kind of muscular, I mean, she's pretty, kind of like those, typical, I guess you can say fashion models? But she's not as muscular, but still pretty strong. She would basically start, looking at him, aka, Lancelot, as she would say this. Why does he look mad at me? As he would say this, specifically Cuchulainn. Well, let's just say he has a vendetta against blondies. Let's just say that. As, well, Lancelot would start glaring at her, getting ready to try and attack her, but the chains are still binding him to that spot. As one of them would say this, so you're fused with him. As he would say this, specifically, Jack. As he would say this, yes, pretty much. But unfortunately, our master is probably gonna die in a few days. As they would basically say this. Wait, what? As All Might would just say this. Die in a few days? What do you mean by that? As, Jack would say this. Well, because our host doesn't have a master anymore, in a few days he's gonna be turning into dust. Or even worse, become a freaking vegetable. As one of them would say this. So, how are we gonna stop it then? Says, wait for a sec. Said recovery girl. As he would say this. Well, we need to get him a new master. Preferably one with, sufficient mana supply. And all of you seem to be not in the, minority. As they would say this. What is that supposed to mean? Says, Midnight. As he would say this. Well, your mana is not really good for him. In fact, your mana supply is pretty much basically like zero. As they would say this. So, what is that supposed to mean? Like mana, as in magic? As he would say this. Yes and no. Instead of calling it magic, we call it magecraft. Actual magic is actually declared as, probably something from the Age of Gods. And trust me, the Age of Gods were pretty much crazier. And because of it, well, unfortunately, quirks becoming dominant would basically cause several, mage families, or at least the ones that basically decide to live here in this world, well, let's just say they don't really have any mana. As they would say this, so is there anybody that basically has enough mana for, Izuku to live? Says, wait for a second. As Bakugo said that, as he would say this. I guess. I think I remember some girl from your class. I think it was called Class 1A, I'm guessing. Missy. As she would say this. Just call me Bakugo, for God's sakes. She would basically start, shouting at him. As he would say this. Yeesh, girl, have a bit of manners. Anyway, I remembered a girl with sufficient mana supply. Back when it was still pretty much being controlled, or more specifically when our host was being controlled by that mashed Kiryu-like girl. As one of them would say this. So, which one was it? As he would say this. Can't remember. Maybe you should bring your entire class to come here. Or at least, tell your class to basically come here so I can check which one has the most sufficient mana supply. So, that person can become Izuku's new master. As they would say this. So, then, says, what is her name? As Aizawa would say this. Sure then. As he would say this. Good. But I should be, letting Izuku have his rest for now. After all, after being controlled by that stupid noble phantasm of hers, he would probably have a lot of strain in his body. As one of them would say this, specifically Bakugo. As Bakugo would say this. Is he going to be okay? As he would say this. You're quite worried about him. Are you childhood friends? Oh, never mind. I already know about his little memories, especially you basically bullying him. And not only that, he would start to laugh a little, as he would say this. Not only that, he was actually in love with you, and you decide to just, crush his little dream of his, as everybody would just be in shock, as they would start to look towards Bakugo, as Bakugo would say this. Wait, Izuku liked me? She would basically start to, become a little bit angry at herself, as he would say that, specifically Jack. Yes, and he decided to just crush it all away instead, saying that he's nothing more than weak, telling him to just commit suicide, in fact. Oh my god. And I can't believe you actually did it. And he even freaking liked you. What is he, a freaking masochist? Oh well. So, can you bring some of your students here? So I can finally find, a master for him before he could die. Or turn into a freaking vegetable. As, well, All Might would say this. Sure. As they would start to leave, specifically All Might, Aizawa, and Midnight. After they left, Aizawa would basically be left there, just like, currently at the door, as she would basically start to look at Jack. As she would basically move on, going back with, the rest of the group. As, a certain girl, aka, Bakugo, would basically look at Jack, as she would say this. So you're telling me that Izuku liked me? As he would say this. Yeah. He liked you so much that he even allowed himself to become a little bit of a punching bag for you. But it seems that you decided to just crush his little dreams. Even crush his little crush of yours. And because of this, he no longer likes you. As she would basically just say, what? He no longer likes me? As he would say this. Well, it makes sense. After all, you basically told him to basically go commit suicide at one time. I'm pretty disappointed in you. As he would basically just look at her in contempt. As she would say this. Why? Why did I do that? She would basically start to cry a little bit. As he would say this. Anyway, I should be going back into his little mindscape for now, to basically start reconciling with him, especially with his new master coming soon. As they would basically start to leave, specifically Lancelot, Cuchulainn, and finally, Jack. They would start to go back into his mindscape as Bakugo would basically start to look at Izuku's unconscious body. As Recovery Girl would say this. Are you okay, dear? As she would say this. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. She would start repeating that. As she would start to, cry a little bit. As she would basically walk forward to Izuku's unconscious body. As she would basically hug him. She would basically go onto the bed and basically start hugging him even more. As she would say this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't know that you had a crush on me. I'm sorry. I love you. Please just don't go away. I just want you to live. She would basically start to cry even more. And more. And more. As her tears would start to soak the unconscious body of Izuku. As his body would start to, glisten in the, in the liquids of, Bakugo's tears. I should say this. I'm sorry for what I did. Just please, when you wake up, just forgive me. She would basically start to cry even more. So, let's go back to a different perspective. So, the rest of the students, except for Bakugo, are basically in their, living room. Or more specifically, I guess you can say actually I don't really know what to call it. So, one of them specifically, a female version of, Mina is basically getting out of the, shower, basically after, eavesdropping on both, Bakugo and also, wait for a second. And recovery girl, as she would say this. Fresh showers are absolutely great. As one of them would basically say this, specifically a girl with red hair, red eyes, and sharp teeth would say this. Whoa, Mina, you look great. As she would say this. Well, the showers are pretty great too, but that felt a bit painful. As one of them would say this. Well, wait for a second, god dang. Specifically, a girl with blonde hair and like some sort of like black streak around it, almost resembling a lightning bolt. As she would say this. So, guys, do you want to talk about that little incident in the USJ? They would basically freeze up as they would say this. Oh, yeah, said one of them. Specifically, a girl with. Wait for a second. A girl with dark hair and dark eyes would say this. Oh, yeah, that. It's super weird that those boys had weird quirks. As the same girl, aka Ida, would say this. Yeah, and not only that, one of them is currently in our school. As one of them would say this, specifically a girl with, well, half and half hair. One side is white and the other one is red. As she would say this. Really? So, who is this boy exactly? As she would say this. So, remember the one that that was defeated by both All Might, Bako, and also Izumi? As Izumi would light up, as she would say this, you mean my brother? As they would basically be in shock, as one of them would say this, wait, that's your brother? As one of them would say this, yeah, what happened to him? I mean, his hair seems to be kind of, green, but all of his hair, or at least, the whole of his hair is basically just like blue. As one of them would say this, specifically a girl with, wait for a second, purplish hair tied up into, I guess you could say grapes. And she would say this, yeah, that voice kind of hot. She would basically start to lick her lips as, well, Izumi would start to glare at her as she would say this, why are you looking at me like that? As she would say this, don't talk about my brother like that, you damn perv. As she would say this, why? I mean, I can definitely see you, as she would say this, stop. As she would basically glare at her, as they would get a knock on the door, as one of them, specifically a girl with earjacks for earlobes, would say this, I'm coming. They would basically see that this girl, or this person, was All Might, as All Might would basically say this, and behind her was Aizawa and Midnight, as, well, this girl, aka, All Might would say this, girls, we need to talk, and it's very important. So, this is going to be the end of this episode, so I'm going to be leaving it off as a cliffhanger. So, yeah. So, I hope you liked the video, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye!